Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and today I'm going to talk about how you can use any fantasy army in a new game by Mike Hutchinson, creator of Gaslands, called Hobgoblin. If you are unfamiliar, Gaslands is a super cool game where you can take Matchbox cars and kit them out with all kinds of weaponry, and you're able to play a miniatures game with easily accessible things. Again, you can use whatever minis or cars you have access to and kind of customize it to your heart's content, but it is a full and complete game. That same ethos was now brought to what we call rank and flank or rank and file fantasy armies. These are the ones where you have like large columns of warriors all kind of ranked up real tight. If you're a longtime wargamer, what it really harkens back to for me personally is those old Warhammer Fantasy Battle like images that they would have the battle reports in the old magazines where you would kind of see the block formations move, and because that's how the regiments were structured within the game of fantasy battles, it like matched it. You could really see it in your head. But where many games, either exist to push a model line or are very, model intensive, this is meant to be the most accessible version of that type of rule set. Now I say accessible rather than, easy, because there is a lot of like mechanical depth within Hobgoblins, but it just doesn't look so on the surface because they're not trying to shove models in your face. They are live on Kickstarter right now, and if I'm not mistaken, please don't quote me on this, I believe there's going to be an entry in the next Blaster magazine, but Hobgoblins will be its own thing going out, and your local game store should be able to have access to it, so please go support both Mike Hutchinson and his team over there at Electi-Studios, and then also your local game store. And while I will have a full discussion about Hobgoblins as a game system and how it simplifies that, this video is about, let's say you're interested in that game, you own some fantasy models, but you're not sure how to create the bespoke, actual basing to make your miniatures. That was complete gibberish. You have a bunch of fantasy models, but you're not sure how to create the cool basing things to really get the most out of them when you want to play Hobgoblins. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through the processes with more of a voiceover and just kind of record myself as I'm making these, but I will give plenty of depth in terms of actual written instructions, cool tips, that kind of thing. If you have specific questions on what you see here, like bits that you need filled in, please ask them below and I will be responding right away. Let's talk about how I did this. Started off with getting the measurements for the different types of units in the game. These are from the core rules and I have them up on the screen here for you. So to start off, you're going to get a big old piece of foam board. You can get these at any craft store for very, very cheap. And you're going to cut out the dimensions of the base for the unit you want to represent. Of course, here is a graph with all of the various sizes for the different types of regiments. For me personally, since I wasn't trying to port over a square base from a different game system, I decided to basically just keep it simple and pick a midpoint between all the minimums and maximums. And what I got essentially was 6 inches by 4 inches. So that's exactly what I cut out. Now for every single unit, you're going to cut 2 pieces. One's going to be the base, the other is going to be the slots that we put our minis into. So line them up. You'll see here at the end I put a small slit on the side, and you can see my thumb kind of grazing along the side. That is a little nub to make it easier for me to pick up the regiment. I don't have to pick it up by a model. It gives me a little cleft that I can actually pick these things up with. I wish more miniature companies did these, because I feel like less fantasy models would be falling all over the place in rank and flank games if you had just a little kind of notch to put your finger. Next, we're going to decide where our dudes are standing on our regiment. So this is the actual outline, the base. This is the canvas with which you get to create the miniatures you want. I did a few configurations, and I'll throw a few pictures up here on the screen. You could do large hordes of infantry, where you just kind of cram as many guys on there as you want. The different footprints for the different bases will allow you to do different kinds of things. For example, on a horde-sized base with as many Skaven as you can fit, it's going to be a lot of little miniatures. This, I decided to kind of be more representative of the idea rather than going hog wild on fitting as many orcs as I could. So for my light or savage orcs, I decided to keep them as light infantry, which is why they're 6 by 4. And I decided to put just a few on. You could do all infantry. You could do a mix of things, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the big stabba to represent the keyword devastating charge. We'll get to that later. And then there's also a configuration where you can use really cool terrain pieces and just take up a bunch of the space doing that. So this is an opportunity for you to really let your hobby flag free. I mean, you can just do anything. These pictures are just for inspiration, and the process is the exact same for all of them. I'm using GW minis here. You're going to basically trace an outline of the base that you want to keep. Now what's important during this step is you're deciding where everyone's located. For example, me, I have a big staba. Try to decide how you want this unit to look before you just start cutting holes into things. I would highly recommend putting other models near where you're thinking about put someone to kind of give them some context, but really just decide where you want everybody. Then you're going to cut out those holes. I like doing a little pizza pie thing and then going along the edges. This is assuredly the most boring process or part of this entire thing. Then you can put the models in the hole to make sure that they are, easy to come in and out and they don't, get caught on too much. The edges don't need to be perfect. We're going to be doing like texture stuff like that to make a cool little diorama scene, and that'll make it look rough anyway, so don't worry too much. Once you have your two boards, one that's complete and the other one that is Swiss cheese now, you're going to glue them together and let it dry. The next step for me was going outside, and I used the Game Master primer. Let's see, this one is called Ruins and Cliffs. It's basically a spray-on primer, but what's cool about it is it's water-based, and so it doesn't melt foam. If you use a normal type of spray-on primer, it will start to melt the foam core. This is specifically made so that it doesn't. 10 out of 10 recommend. Once that's all dry, I then started adding texture material. I like to use the big tubs of Vallejo because the amount of coverage you get per one of those tubs way outclasses anything GW does. And I just think they're a great value. And it's how I did most of my bone splitters, so I'm trying to try to match that scheme. Again, this is our opportunity. Do whatever sounds cool. Once that's dry, we'll dry brush on a few colors. I like to highlight mine with Ushabti bone just to kind of make it pop just a little bit, add a tiny bit of shadow. If you have them, this is a good point to also throw on some diorama bits. So I like the flowers from Gamer's Grass, little tree bits I think I got at my local craft store, and the mighty finishing move, the big flex that every wargamer loves, is the awesome, go around the base rim with black. And with that all done, you can see our final product here, a mighty warband. I decided to put the Wargog Prophet that my good friend Jack from Rerolling Ones painted for me up front, because in Hobgoblins, rather than having like a general be like a separate model or whatever, he tends to just be like a unit upgrade. You pick one of your units and you're like, the general's with these guys, and then he gets the bonus. And boom, with that we have our first unit completed for a super cool fantasy game. Thank you so much, Mike Hutchinson, for just giving me the time and chance to talk about your cool, awesome game coming to Kickstarter. Now, a few things I want to add here on the end as kind of like helpful tips if you're not someone who normally does these kinds of things. It's always easier to measure first, cut last. By that I mean make sure, again, everybody's where you want them to be. These things are very easy to crank out in mass quantities. The only thing I would really kind of mention is when it comes to basing material, just be aware of like the kind of weight that you're adding. So if you have a huge heavy terrain piece, you might want to, instead of using foam core for the bottom piece, use plasticard or something maybe with a bit more durability. So my Savage Orcs are very lightweight, so this thing is not going to bow or bend, but I do know that there are some metal minis that can do that. That's just a corner case scenario. You could also, if you wanted to, put magnets in the bottom of, the bottom row, I guess, or bottom, I guess. What do you call it? Foam core? I'm breaking. Sorry, everybody. But you could put magnets in there, and all my little orcs are magnetized, so they could do that. However, between the roughness of the cuts with the foam and then some of the basing material kind of like going along the edges, none of these guys are like magnetized, but none of them like move all willy-nilly. I mean, there's the Prophet, but he's a special model. But you know what I mean? Like, you can kind of create them so that they're snug, but not sticking to your guys. I'm just saying magnetization is still an option and is always an option. Other things to think about, you could also throw on some washers if you want to add some weight so that the foam is not too light. Although I have found that with, the 2 layers of foam and the miniatures and basing stuff on top, they're not going to move around to a stiff breeze, but if weight's an issue, you can always add weight or re-strengthen it if the models are heavy. I really do hope you go support these guys over on Kickstarter. Again, it's Hobgoblin, a super cool fantasy game that you will be hearing about here on the channel. And congrats to everyone who's a part of that team and their successful launch. Thank you all so much for hanging out today, and we'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.